Hi guys, welcome to Fasihi Lounge Kenya. I'm Bihenda
and I'm Sheila.
And today we want to discuss the book Homegoing by Gyasi. This book is about slavery and lineage, and the author has used several characters to bring out these major themes amongst others, and we aim to delve into a deep discussion on everything as pertains to the book. So join us and welcome.
Thank you. So the book is mainly about two family lineages, with the two main characters being Ephia and Essie, the two matriarchs of the two lineages discussed all through the book. These are two sisters separated at birth or before birth, with the two lineages having completely different outcomes and ways of living.
So Ephia's lineage, I'll give you a roundup on Ephia's lineage. Mame is the matriarch, and Mame had two daughters, Ephia and Essie. Through Ephia's lineage, we see that Ephia married James Collins and had a son, Key. Key married Nana Ya, and they had a son, James Collins. James Collins married Akosua, and they had a daughter, Abena. Abena had an affair with Ohene Nyarko, and they had a daughter, Akua. Akua married Asamoah, and they had three children, Abena, Ama, and Yo. Then Yo married Esther, and they had a daughter, Marjorie. So from Ephia to Marjorie, we have 7 generations.
So on the other side, we have Essie Athare, the other sister, who's born of Mame and Big Man Athare. Essie is raped in the dungeons, and she has a daughter called Ness. Ness is married to Sam, and they both have Kojo Freeman, a son who is married to Anna Foster, and together they have about 8 children from letter A to H. Here we go into the story of H, who marries Essie Jackson, and they have 2 daughters, Willie and Hazel. Willie marries Robert, and together they have 2 children, Josephine and Sonny. And then from Sonny, we have a marriage between Sonny and Amani, and together they have Marcus. And this is now where Marcus and Marjorie, the last 2 descendants of the 2 lineages, meet together.
So from Essie to Marcus,
we have about 7 generations. Yeah. So this author has clearly explained the different times in which all these characters lived. They lived between the 18th century, late 18th century to the 21st century. So we have about 300 years between these 2 generations. We can see now Essie and Ephia live in 2 different worlds.
Now, the major theme that the author has explored is the theme of slavery. And this is shown mainly through the lineage of Essie, who started out being like a free person in their village until their village was attacked by a neighboring tribe or a neighboring village, and Essie was captured and sold into slavery. Interesting enough, Essie was sold to the white man, that is James Collins, who is married to her sister Ephia, but of course unbeknownst to all. And this is how Essie's lineage begins its life in slavery. And throughout the book, we see that the author shows how each and every member of Essie's lineage, except Marcus, is a slave and is and grows up in slavery. We are shown the dire conditions that the slaves used to live in, including being locked in dark spaces underground, in bunkers, being forced to live and work in bunkers where there is no lighting, no ventilation, no facilities, and getting like 1 meal per day, or sometimes no meals even in a day. So the author has, and being abused also by the slave handlers or the white men, being abused physically, sexually, emotionally, psychologically. And the author has used these very vivid explanations to explain how the slaves in Essie's lineage had to live and what they had to go through.
Yeah, so in this case, in the book, it's almost as though slavery is synonymous with torture in any way, shape, or form. On the other hand, where we had Ephia, as much as Efia lived in the Gold Coast or present-day Ghana, their lineage has a lot of challenges as well. We also see slavery in the form of the Fante and Asantes having constantly conquering each other and taking slaves from each other to sell them to the white man. So that's another aspect of slavery we see in the book. We also see the way people were slaves were tortured in the case of within the African settings, where slaves who are owned by other Africans were also beaten and flogged and whatnot. I think for those two, that's the main discrepancy between those two. A majority of one lineage was purely slaves, and the majority of the other were quote unquote the slave traders.
Yes.
Yes.
Shall we move to the next screen?
Yeah, and then now all this slavery and whatnot, now in the other hand where there was no slavery from the white person, the main theme was now colonialism. Yes, in the sense that as much as people were fighting each other and whatnot, it was the white man who was trying to colonize and take as much land, as much powers from the people, as many slaves as they possibly could, and instigating fights between these two communities to ensure that there was no harmony between the African communities in that setting. Yeah.
So the next theme is racism, and with this we'll tie racial prejudice and racial segregation.
Yeah, segregation.
So racism in the sense that obviously we have the white man like looking down on the black man,
yeah.
seeing him as less than human, seeing him as not worthy to live and work in the same conditions as the white man. Then in terms of the racial segregation, we see that white people and black people have different living conditions.
Yeah.
This is best explained or showcased with Efia, who married James Collins and ended up living in the castle while as a free person, while the sister Essie was captured as a slave and traded and ended up living underneath the castle in a bunker, or in a dungeon. Sorry, not a bunker, in a dungeon. So the different living situations, the different working situations, which are explored even further in the book, where we see characters like Willie, who has a very good gift and a talent of singing, being allowed to sing in an opera because she's a black woman. And being told that the only work she can do in this club is to sweep and to clean the toilets. Yeah,
we also see that in the sense of Effie and H, where some people were being beaten or I guess being orchestrated because they had to move away of the path of a white person on the streets. I think that also happens to Kojo and the family. As much as free slaves were there, they still had to quote unquote live separately and not interact as much with white people.
So racial prejudice,
So in racial prejudice, it was seen a lot in the book that the black man was always seen as a person in the wrong, regardless of whichever situation they were in. We see that in the case of Ness, when she meets this young child of another slaver, and when she's defending this child from not being beaten by the slave master's son, it's deemed as though she's the one in the wrong because she's accused that she's in the wrong by this child.
What we see in terms of racial prejudice is that anything that happens that is wrong is assumed. What is assumed is that a black person is the one who has done the wrong. It's never going to be a white person. So in the case of Ness and the children of her slave owner, slave master, even if the children do wrong, the assumption is that the black people in the house, that is Ness and the other child, are the ones who have done the wrong thing. So there is no question of trying to understand the story. The assumption is the black person that is around is the one who has committed the offense, whichever it may be. And in the case of H, I believe
he was unjustly jailed, taken to the mines and whatnot, regardless of whether he was wrong or right. So, given that we've discussed the lineages, what are the themes you came across in this book?
Well, the author explores a vast range of themes, including slavery, racism, racial prejudice, racial segregation, colorism, tribal wars and conflicts, sexual abuse, sexuality, physical abuse, and suicide.
Yeah, I think we also have religion, which was a major fact.
Yes.
Yeah, so in these themes, I think the two main ones are racism and slavery that goes through the whole book.
Yes. So when we discuss the theme of slavery, the author shows that Effie's lineage was more of slave traders, while Essie's lineage was more of slaves.
Yes.
And this is stemmed from the fact that Essie, though being a free woman, just like her sister Effie, ended up being captured in a tribal war and sold into slavery. And from there, this is what rolls the ball of her whole lineage being slaves.
Yes, and then now once all the slaves are captured, the slave is captured, and then it's taken to America. Now from there we kind of see the challenges they go into, which now informs our other themes, which is racism, and racial prejudice and racial segregation. So with racism, we find that white people really basically outright hated black people. A black man was taken to the fields to work under the scorching sun, while lighter skinned black people, some of them were allowed to work inside the houses. Yes.
Okay. With racial prejudice, we see how the author brings out the fact that every wrong thing that happens, every offense, is assumed that it is a black man who has committed it, and it can never be a white man.
Black people were denied opportunities to work, opportunities to live better, etc., etc. With that, now slavery and racism ties us together with the theme of colonialism, which happened now in the present day Ghana.
There's also the aspect of racial segregation, where black people and white people are separated in terms of their race, in their living conditions are separated, as well as their working conditions. Everything they do, from Effia, who was married to a white man living in a castle, while her sister Essie, who was a slave living in a dungeon. From the working conditions, where you see Willie, who wants to work as a singer, but is unable to because she's black, and is only allowed to work as a cleaner, while the white people are allowed to work as singers. And then also in terms of even walking in the streets, where you see the black people would have to cross and to the other side of the street, just so they didn't walk on the same side with the white people.
White people, yes. I think that carries it well. With this now, racism and slavery brings us back to colonialism in now the present day Ghana, where now after the slave trade was established, now the white people infiltrated into the African land. They wanted to take over the land. They wanted to take over trade. They instigated tribal wars to make sure that there was no harmony. They brought their own people to spread their religion, which is Christianity, bringing in missionaries, etc. And now we see how this affects the way people talk, the way people, culture and religion and whatnot. Yes.
Okay, sexual abuse, the theme of sexual abuse.
One set of the book where we see the sister Essie when she's captured. Sexual abuse is what happens in the dungeons where the cops come and rape her. And this is now where her lineage starts to have like the slightly lighter skinned people and live in racism. Other than that, we also see women who wanted to bail out the black men who were captured during the time where we had black people working in the mines. They would be sexually assaulted, and that's why the men did not want to tell their wives to come and bail them out. And this is just the author does not give us the full picture, but we assume there's a lot more that was not captured in the book about.
Yes, and also women who were in the dungeon together with Essie were also raped. The author intimates that some of them were raped. There was one who was a bit hysterical at some point, and she was taken away by force. And the assumption there is that she was raped, because I think that's what the author tries to bring out at that particular point. Okay, the theme of sexuality. This is explored in minimal detail by the author using two characters, that is Kujo and Ki. One of the main characters, Ki, and one of the supporting characters, Kujo. that seem to somehow or somewhat develop a relationship there or an attraction to each other, but this was not explored in full detail. So it's just a little bit of an exploration by the author, but it brings out how sexuality can be was covered also in this book.
Yes, and I think other than sexuality now brings about the issue of religion, which I think might be one of the reasons why he was taken away by his father, because he was quote unquote a Christian. So we find that there are two religions explored. There's the African cultural religion at the moment between Fante and Asante, and then we have the Christianity, which was introduced by the missionaries, and we see how it affects Efia's lineage in the sense of some people being raised by missionaries and whatnot, as well as the people who in Esi's lineage were called witches, chased out of churches, flogged and forced to conform to language and whatnot. So I think that's part religion and culture that intermarries at some point in the book.
Good. The next theme is physical abuse. Also, this was a minimal theme, but the author brings it out at the beginning of the story with the characters Kobe, Baba, and Efia. Kobe being Efia's father, and Baba being her stepmother. And the author tells us that Baba hated Efia and would occasionally physically abuse her. And as a result of her abusing Efia, Kobe would then come and abuse Baba.
Yeah, so it's sort of incremental. One person abuses another, then the other person abuses the next. And this sort of moves, especially even in the other side of the world where we have the slaves. So it comes to show that evil is just everywhere, regardless of religion, race, or whatever. It just has to be dealt with. There was also physical abuse in the sense of people who are working in the mines, in the fields. If they would not acquire the quota required of them that day, they would be flogged to a point where some of them died. Yeah, especially in the Americas as portrayed by the author in the book. Yeah. And I think all these struggles that people dealt with now culminates into a sense of now where we have issues of depression, suicide, etc.
Physical abuse definitely goes hand in hand with slavery, because in order for you to be able to maintain slaves, you have to physically abuse them. Whenever they do something that is not in line with what you want as a slave master, definitely you will end up physically abusing them. Yeah,
so it's more like the book just speaks of the evil of, I think the major thing, the evil of how slavery transcends different generations and how it culminates in different characters differently. Yeah.
Okay, so the last theme I had was suicide, and this is portrayed by one of the characters called Anna, who was married to Kojo. Kojo was a slave, and Anna was a free black woman. But at some point while she was pregnant with her last child, she was captured by white people who were trying to bring her to slavery, and she opted to commit suicide rather than to be a slave.
And this happens during the Jim Crow law, when the law was passed, and white owners would rightfully claim black people who had escaped slavery. So if you want to learn more, maybe learn about, you can go read, Google, whatever, about the Jim Crow movement between the South and the North in America, etc. It's a whole political sphere that we might not be qualified enough to talk about.
So we now move to discussing our favorite and worst characters. So Sheila, who is your favorite character and why? And who is your worst character and why?
My favorite character for sure is Yo. I like his introspection. He goes through a hard time, he gets over it through different ways, and he teaches the next generation the importance of history, whatnot. My worst character would be, at this moment, not Sony, Robert. I hate that he successfully white passed, and in so doing, he really hurt his significant other in the process. Other notable mention is James. He was just a coward.
Yeah.
Okay. What about you?
For me, my favorite character was Abena. Abena is in Efia's lineage. I liked her for the fact that she did her own thing. While most of the female characters in the story are portrayed as being told what to do and who to marry and who to be with, Abena stood out in the sense that she decided for herself and for her life what to do. Where to go. She decided while at some point she was waiting for Ohene Nyarko to marry her. The moment she realized this guy isn't going to marry her, she made a decision and which was best for her and her baby, and she left and went to live a different life.
And the worst?
And the worst character I would have to say is Carson, also known as Sonny. And he is in S's lineage for the very fact that he was like a very irresponsible man. He went around impregnating several women. What we now in present day call a baby daddy and a deadbeat. He was not supporting any of his kids or any of his baby mamas, and also he ended up becoming a drug addict and following around a woman who he was clearly warned from the beginning that she would be trouble.
He had no business dealing with that woman anyway. And I think other notable mentions for yourself.
Other notable mentions is a supporting character, not a main character. Her name is Ma'aku. She helped Ness and Sam try to escape and ended up taking their son with her and bringing him up.
Now that we've spoken about characters, what writing styles did you see?
In terms of writing styles, the one that came out very clearly to me was symbolism. The fact that the fire and water, which are represented in both the lineages, fire being represented in Efia's lineage and water in S's lineage. Fire started with Mame when she lit a fire to escape, and it ended up haunting Efia because not in the way that her stepmother Baba said that the fire prevented her from being able to give birth, and it ended up haunting Akua, who is way down in the lineage, but it came to her in the form of dreams, which culminated in her burning her house and killing two out of her 3 children and burning her 3rd child as well as herself. And then it ended up with Marjorie. Water started with Essie because she was sold as a slave, and then she was transported by way of a slave boat from Ghana to the US. And then it went down the lineage with Kojo working to build boats. And then it came down to the last character, who is Marcus, having an actual fear of water.
And we see now these two actually combine at the end, sort of like how water dries up the fire. Other than that, do you have any other themes?
Under symbolism, there's still the symbolism of the black pendant, this black stone pendant that is used to tie their lineages, both their lineages. So what happened from the beginning is that Mame gave identical black pendants to both her daughters, Efia and Essie, while Essie's pendant was lost in the dungeons where she was captured. Efia's pendant was actually passed down throughout her lineage up to the point where it got to the last person, who is Marjorie. But when Marcus and Marjorie come together at the end, Marjorie actually gives the pendant to Marcus.
I think for me the main way in which the character, the author has used as a writing style is 3rd person narration. She takes us through the lives of all these characters by assuming their point of view, so we get to actually understand how each and every character felt in the sense and in the specific times they were in. She takes us into the minds of people who are depressed, the minds of people who are enslaved, the people who were free, they were not free, etc. And we sort of see this through from the first character to the last character. So now that this author used this different writing styles, do you think she was able to capture the attention of the intended audience?
Yes, she was able to capture the attention of the intended audience. whoever they may be, but anybody who reads the book, their attention will be captured, because the story is very encapsulating, very encompassing. It draws you in right from the beginning and up to the end. Yes.
Yeah. Who would you recommend this book to?
I would recommend this book to anybody who wants to probably learn about lineage and family and is interested in just knowing more about probably slavery and colonialism, because it teaches a lot about that. But really, I would recommend the book to everyone. I think I always say I would recommend it. There's no one I wouldn't recommend the book to, as long as they are of age and they can read. They can read.
I think for me, I would recommend it to specifically young adult African children who perhaps want to live, study, or work in the US or in any country in the West, especially so that they can understand the history of places and how to deal with such issues, and also to extend grace to the people they meet, the Black Americans, Black people in the UK, and whichever other country they might be in at the moment. But other than that, I agree. Anyone who's grown up should be able to read and understand this book, regardless of their geographical location in Africa, India, Asia, etc.
Because even white people should read this book. They should be aware of what it is that slavery was about, and how their white counterparts were the propagators and instigators of slavery. So I think it's a teachable moment for everyone.
Yeah, it's a teachable moment for sure. I think for us in the local context, I would really like to see if this book would have been taken, perhaps by high school curriculum, for students to just understand the effects of slavery in a different context outside of Kenya. How do you rate the book?
So rating the book out of 10, I would give it a 10. The author, to me, has written a very beautiful story. One, it's beautiful.
Yes.
Just in terms of the story itself, from beginning to end, it's a beautiful story, and the characters have been brought to life.
Yes.
I can visualize each and every one of the characters just by the way she describes them. I can see them. If you ask me to probably do a portrait, I can do a portrait of Yo or a portrait of Sonny, just because of how realistic the author has made their characters. And the whole aspect of family and lineage is one that speaks dearly to me. I like the fact that she has tied 7 generations and shown how the blood that flows through their veins is the same. And the 2 lineages, despite living totally different lives, ended up together because of the last 2 characters. And also, she has brought out the title, that is Homegoing, by the 2 last characters, Marcus and Marjorie, actually getting together and going back home in search of their roots.
Their roots, yes. I think for me, I would rate the book a 9 out of 10, simply because I want to get another book that would intrigue me more than this. This was a really good book. From the first paragraph that the author introduces us to, you're hooked as a reader. And that is what I like about reading. I would like a book that encapsulates me from the onset. In many cases, you find that you have to read a whole chapter before you're actually engrossed in a book, which I really, really love. For me, the parting shot for this book, sort of like the main point of the book, is the importance of history and storytelling. If there was no storytelling from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next, we would probably not have this book. And the author, the character Yo, is the only character in the book who brings out the importance of storytelling from one generation to another, and he sort of won the challenge of whose story to believe. And I think in this case, it brings us to the current context of now, when we have the wars going on around us at the moment. So whose story is real? Which media house is showing us the true picture? And I think all these things in society culminate into a perfectly explained book. This was a really good book, and I think I would recommend it to anyone. So
if you could change any part of the story, the beginning, the end, any part, or if you could change any character, what or who would you change?
Perhaps I'd change the ending. I'd make sure that if I was the author, I'd make Marcus to be a spitting image of Marjorie's dad. That way it would be outrightly clear that they are related in one way or another. That way there would be no second guessing. They would totally know they belonged to a singular family together or something like that. And I hoped that he would find the pendant. As much as it was 300 years, I really wished he had found the pendant in the dungeon. I don't know. Maybe. What do you think?
For me, if I could change any part, I would have wished at some point at the middle of the lineages, two of the characters from both lineages would meet somewhere.
That would be a good span of the work.
Yeah. Yes. For instance, someone like Kojo, while he was in the US, then you find maybe that is S's lineage. You find someone from Efia's lineage like James or Key traveling to the US and then meeting Kojo. Yeah. And then if Essie had not lost the pendant, but instead left the dungeon with it and passed it down, then maybe he would be having his pendant before he passes it down, and then he travels to the US and meets Kojo and finds Kojo also has this exact same pendant, and then it like kind of tries it snowballs them trying to figure out how do we both have the same pendant. Then they start trying to learn and they find out they are actually related.
That would be quite interesting. The book would really change from there. Anyway, thanks guys for joining us.
Join us for our next book, which will be Stay With Me by
Ayobami Adebayo, who's a Nigerian author. Thank you.